The town called him pathetic, a lonely rancher so desperate he ordered a woman like livestock. They waited at the station to watch him finally claim something soft, something gentle. But when Mei Lin stepped off that stagecoach, tall and broad-shouldered with eyes that refused to apologize, the laughter started. Not polite chuckles, raw, cutting mockery that stripped Ethan naked in front of everyone he'd ever known. His dream bride wasn't delicate, she wasn't white, and she sure as hell wasn't what he'd imagined during all those cold nights alone. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The cabin smelled like failure. Ethan Brooks stood in the doorway of his ranch house, watching the sun drop behind the mountains like it couldn't wait to be done with the day. The light bled orange across the Wyoming Valley, turning everything the color of old wounds. Beautiful, maybe. If you were the kind of person who still noticed beauty, he wasn't. 28 years old, and he'd already worn through the best parts of himself. His hands were scarred from barbed wire and bad decisions. His face had that lean, weathered look of someone who'd forgotten what it felt like to sleep well. The ranch demanded everything, dawn to dusk, season after season, and gave back just enough to keep him breathing. That was it. Just breathing, not living. "You heading into town Saturday?" Jacob Pritchard had asked him last week, leaning against the fence post with that easy grin men got when life was working out. "Sarah's making her apple cake. You should come by." Ethan had mumbled something non-committal. He'd stopped going to those gatherings. Couldn't stomach watching other men return to warm houses. Wives who smiled when they walked through the door. Children who ran to greet them. It made the silence of his own cabin unbearable. The loneliness had teeth. It bit down slow at first, just an ache in his chest when he woke to an empty bed, a hollowness when he ate dinner alone. But over the years it had gotten meaner, started gnawing at him in ways that made him wonder if this was all there was. Work until your body gave out. Die alone. Get buried in ground too hard for anyone to cry over. He'd tried. Met a girl at a church social 3 years back, Mary Catherine Henderson, daughter of the feed store owner. Pretty enough. Polite. But she'd taken one look at his calloused hands and dirt-stained clothes and decided she'd rather wait for someone cleaner, someone easier, someone who wasn't him. After that, Ethan stopped trying, stopped hoping, until 6 months ago, when Thomas McAllister showed him the advertisement in the back of the Rocky Mountain News. Matrimonial correspondents, respectable gentlemen seeking companionship may inquire. "Half the men out here use these services," Thomas had said, tapping the page with his finger. "Nothing shameful about it. Women back east want a fresh start. We need what we need." Ethan had stared at those words for a long time. We need what we need. That night, he'd sat at his rickety kitchen table with a piece of paper and a pencil worn down to a nub. Writing had never come easy to him. Words felt clumsy in his mouth, worse on paper. But he'd forced himself. "My name is Ethan Brooks. I own a cattle ranch in Wyoming Territory. It's hard work, but honest. I'm looking for a wife who values simplicity and quiet. Someone gentle. I can't offer luxury, but I can offer safety and a home." He'd read it over a dozen times, hating how desperate it sounded, but he'd sent it anyway. 3 weeks later, the first letter arrived. Her name was Mei Lin. The handwriting was careful, each letter formed with precision that suggested English wasn't her first language, but the words were clear. "Mr. Brooks, I received your letter through the matrimonial service. I am 26 years old. I came to San Francisco 5 years ago with my father. He worked on the railroad until he died. I have been working in a laundry house since then. The work is hard, the pay is small. I am looking for a different life. I am not educated in American ways. I do not know if I am what you are looking for, but I am strong. I can work. I do not complain. If you are still interested, please write back." Mei Lin Ethan had read that letter so many times the paper started to soften at the creases. "I am strong. I can work. I do not complain." She sounded solid, dependable, someone who understood that survival mattered more than sentiment. He liked that, respected it. He wrote back. Over the next 4 months, letters traveled between Wyoming and San Francisco. Hers were short, practical. She described the laundry house, The long hours, the women she worked alongside who saved every penny hoping to escape. She didn't romanticize her life, didn't pretend it was anything other than brutal. Ethan appreciated the honesty, but somewhere along the way his mind started filling in the gaps. She wrote, "The steam from the washing tubs burns my hands." He imagined delicate fingers, reddened from work but still graceful. She wrote, "I am taller than most women here." He imagined willowy, elegant height, like those illustrations in magazines. She wrote, "I do not fit well in most places." He imagined a quiet, gentle soul who'd been overlooked just like him. He wasn't lying to himself on purpose. Loneliness just had a way of reshaping reality into something bearable, something hopeful. When he finally sent the money for her train ticket, he'd already built an entire person in his head. Soft-spoken, grateful. Someone who'd see his rough cabin and scarred hands and think, this is enough. Someone who'd make the silence feel less like drowning. The day she was supposed to arrive, Ethan woke before dawn. He scrubbed himself raw in the creek, shaved for the first time in months, put on his only clean shirt. The fabric pulled tight across his shoulders. He'd lost weight over the winter and hadn't bothered replacing clothes that didn't fit anymore. Didn't matter. Today was about starting over. He rode into town 2 hours early, too anxious to wait at the ranch. The stagecoach wasn't due until noon, but he couldn't sit still. His stomach felt like it was trying to claw its way out of his body. The town of Ridgeway wasn't much, a main street lined with false front buildings, a general store, a saloon, a church that doubled as a schoolhouse. Population maybe 200 if you counted the surrounding ranches, and every single one of them seemed to know about Ethan's mail-order bride. "Heard she's coming in today," Samuel Porter called from the porch of the general store, grinning wide. "You nervous, Brooks?" Ethan forced a thin smile. "Just here to meet the stage." "Hell of a thing, ordering a woman through the mail," Samuel continued, louder now, drawing attention. "Like buying a horse, ain't it? Hope she's got good teeth." Laughter rippled through the men gathered outside the saloon. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Let them laugh. They'd see. Once Maylin arrived, once she stepped off that coach and stood beside him, they'd understand. He wasn't pathetic. He was just practical. By 11:30, a crowd had formed. Women clustered near the general store, whispering behind gloved hands. Men leaned against hitching posts, passing a flask and making bets on what she'd look like. Even the children had gathered, drawn by the spectacle of it all. Ethan stood apart from everyone, near the edge of the street, hands shoved deep in his pockets. His heart hammered against his ribs. "She'll be gentle," he told himself. "She'll be kind. She'll see me and know this is right." The stagecoach rattled into view just past noon, dust billowing behind it like a storm. Ethan's breath caught. The driver hauled back on the reins, and the horses snorted to a stop. The door swung open. And then she stepped out. The world tilted. Maylin wasn't small. She stood nearly 6 feet tall, broad across the shoulders, with arms that looked like they'd been carved from years of hard labor. Her black hair was pulled back in a severe braid, her face angular and striking, not soft, not delicate, nothing like the pale magazine illustrations Ethan had imagined. She wore a plain gray dress that strained slightly at the seams, practical boots caked with dust. Her skin was sun-darkened, her hands rough and capable, and she was Chinese. Ethan had known that. Of course he'd known that. She'd signed her letters Maylin. But somehow, in all his imagining, he'd smoothed that detail into something easier, something the town wouldn't notice. He'd been a fool. The crowd went silent for exactly 3 seconds. Then the laughter started. "Jesus Christ, Brooks!" someone shouted. "You ordered a Chinaman? Look at the size of her. That ain't no bride. That's a damn field hand." The mockery came fast and vicious, voices overlapping into a single wave of cruelty. Ethan's face burned. Maylin stood perfectly still in the center of the street, her expression unreadable. She didn't flinch, didn't lower her gaze, just scanned the crowd with dark, measuring eyes until she found him. Their gazes locked. For a moment, Ethan couldn't move, couldn't think. The weight of every stare pressed down on him like a physical thing. "This is wrong," some part of him whispered. "This isn't what I wanted." But Mei Lin was already walking toward him, not hesitating, not apologizing, just moving forward with the steady confidence of someone who'd survived worse than small-town judgment. She stopped 3 feet away. "Ethan Brooks?" Her voice was low, accented, but steady. He swallowed hard. "Yeah, that's me. I am Mei Lin." She glanced briefly at the crowd, then back at him. "Do you have a wagon?" No greeting, no smile, just a simple, practical question. Ethan's brain scrambled to catch up. Yeah, this way." He turned and walked toward where he'd tied his horse and wagon, acutely aware of every eye following them. The laughter had faded into whispers now, but that almost felt worse. Mei Lin followed without a word. He loaded her single travel trunk into the back of the wagon. She lifted one end herself, not waiting for him to help, and then climbed onto the driver's bench. She settled beside him, spine straight, hands folded in her lap. Ethan snapped the reins. The wagon lurched forward, and Ridgway disappeared behind them. For the first mile, neither of them spoke. Ethan's mind was a mess. Shame twisted in his gut alongside something uglier, resentment. He'd spent months imagining this moment, months convincing himself that companionship was coming, that loneliness would finally end. And now, "You are disappointed." Mei Lin's voice cut through his thoughts. Ethan's hands tightened on the reins. "I didn't say that." "You did not have to." She stared straight ahead, her profile carved in shadow. "Your face said it. The town said it." He wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she was wrong, but the lie stuck in his throat. "I'm adjusting," he said finally, the word tasting like ash. Mei Lin nodded slowly. "I understand." "Do you?" "Yes." Her tone didn't change. "You wanted someone soft, someone small, someone who would make your life easier." Ethan flinched. "That's not—" "It is exactly that." She turned to look at him then, and her eyes were sharp, unflinching. "I do not blame you. Men want what they want. But I am not what you imagined, so now you must decide." "Decide what?" "If you will send me back." The words landed like a punch. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. His pride screamed at him to say yes, to admit this was a mistake, to cut his losses before the humiliation sank any deeper. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the way she'd walked toward him through that crowd without faltering. Maybe it was the steadiness in her voice even now, when most women would have been crying or begging. Maybe it was just exhaustion. "I'm not sending you back," he said quietly. Mei Lin studied him for a long moment. "Why not?" "Because—" He struggled to find the words. "Because I gave my word. And because, you came all this way." It wasn't a good reason. It wasn't even an honest one. But it was all he had. Mei Lin's expression didn't soften, but something shifted in her posture. A fraction of tension released. "Then we will make this work," she said simply. Ethan didn't respond. They rode the rest of the way in silence. The ranch appeared over the ridge just as the sun started its descent, a collection of weathered buildings clustered against the slope of the valley. The main house was small, single-story, built from rough-hewn logs that had grayed over the years. The barn leaned slightly to one side, and the corral fence needed mending in at least 3 places. It wasn't much. Ethan had never been ashamed of it before. Now, seeing it through Mei Lin's eyes, he felt the inadequacy like a knife. "This is it," he said, his voice flat. Mei Lin climbed down from the wagon without waiting for help. She turned in a slow circle, taking in the buildings, the land, the mountains rising in the distance. "It is quiet," she said finally. "Yeah, it's isolated." "That is not a bad thing." She picked up her trunk, lifted it like it weighed nothing, and started toward the house. Ethan hurried to catch up, pushing open the door. The interior was worse than the exterior. One main room that served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting space, a narrow doorway leading to a small bedroom, a fireplace that smoked when the wind blew wrong, furniture that had belonged to his father, functional but joyless. Mei Lin set her trunk down near the door and surveyed the space without comment. "There's only one bedroom," Ethan said quickly, heat rising in his face. "I can sleep in the barn until we—" Until we figure things out. That is not necessary. I am your wife. She turned to face him, her expression neutral. In name, at least, we do not need to pretend otherwise. Ethan's mouth went dry. I wouldn't expect. I know. Her voice softened just slightly. You are not that kind of man. I can see that. Something in the way she said it made his chest tighten. I'll take the barn, he said again, firmer this time. At least for now. Mei Lin nodded. As you wish. She moved to the kitchen area, examining the stove, the shelves, the meager supplies he'd stocked in preparation for her arrival. Do you cook? She asked. Badly. The corner of her mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Then I will cook, she said. You work the ranch. I will manage the house. That is fair. You don't have to. I am not asking permission. She met his gaze evenly. I am telling you how this will work. Ethan blinked. In all his imagining, he'd never pictured a wife who'd speak to him like that, firm, direct, unafraid. He found he didn't entirely hate it. All right, he said slowly. That's all right. Mei Lin turned back to the stove. Then we understand each other. The first week was strange. Ethan kept to his routines, up before dawn, tending the cattle, mending fences, checking water sources. Mei Lin established her own patterns, cooking, cleaning, organizing the chaos he'd let accumulate over years of living alone. They spoke only when necessary. The roof leaks above the bedroom, she'd say. I'll fix it, he'd reply. We need more flour. I'll get some in town. Conversations stripped to their skeletons. No warmth, no connection. But no hostility either. It was functional. Ethan told himself that was enough. On the 8th day, he returned from checking the northern pasture to find Mei Lin in the yard, chopping wood. He stopped short, staring. She'd removed her outer dress, working in just her undershirt and skirt, sleeves rolled to her elbows. The axe rose and fell with practiced efficiency, splitting logs with clean, powerful strikes. Sweat glistened on her skin. Her braid had come loose, dark hair falling around her face. She looked strong, not delicate, not soft, strong. You don't have to do that, Ethan called. Mei Lin glanced up, lowering the axe. We need firewood. I know, but what? She wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. You think I cannot do it? I didn't say that. You thought it. Ethan opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. She wasn't wrong. Mei Lin drove the axe into the chopping block and walked toward him. Where I come from, women work. We do not sit and wait for men to do everything. This isn't where you come from. No. Her expression hardened. This is worse. Here, people think I am weak because I am a woman, and because I am Chinese, so I must work twice as hard to prove I am worth the space I take up. The words hit harder than Ethan expected. I don't think you're weak, he said quietly. Mei Lin studied him. You think I am wrong. That's different. Is it? They stared at each other across the dusty yard, the afternoon sun beating down overhead. Finally, Ethan sighed. Do what you want with the wood. He turned and headed for the barn. Behind him, the sound of the axe resumed, steady, relentless, refusing to stop. 2 weeks after Mei Lin's arrival, Ethan had to go into town for supplies. He left before dawn, hoping to avoid as many people as possible. It didn't work. The moment he tied his horse outside the general store, Samuel Porter materialized from the saloon, grinning like a coyote. Brooks, how's married life treating you? Ethan ignored him, pushing through the door. Samuel followed. Come on, don't be shy. That Chinese gal working out? She pull her weight? Other men in the store turned to listen, barely bothering to hide their interest. Ethan grabbed a sack of flour from the shelf, jaw clenched. Heard she's got arms like a blacksmith, someone muttered. Laughter rippled through the room. Must be something, having a wife built like a man, Samuel pressed. Bet she could wrestle you to the ground, Brooks. Might even enjoy it. More laughter. Ethan's hands tightened on the flour sack until his knuckles went white. Shut your mouth, Porter, he said quietly. Or what? Samuel stepped closer, still grinning. You gonna defend her honor? The honor of a Chinese laundry girl you bought through the mail? The room went silent. Ethan turned slowly. Samuel stood 3 feet away, smug confidence radiating from every pore. For a long moment, Ethan didn't move, didn't speak. Then he set the flower down carefully, straightened, and walked out. The laughter followed him into the street. He rode home with his teeth clenched so hard his jaw ached, Samuel's words echoing in his skull. A Chinese laundry girl you bought through the mail. Was that all she was? Was that all he was? A desperate man who'd paid for companionship because he couldn't earn it honestly? When he reached the ranch, Mei Lin was in the garden she'd started behind the house, turning soil with a spade. She looked up as he dismounted. "You are back early," she observed. "Didn't need much." She nodded, returning to her work. Ethan stood there, watching her move, efficient, purposeful, unbothered by the heat. "They talk about you in town," he said suddenly. Mei Lin didn't pause. "I know. It doesn't bother you? Why would it?" She drove the spade into the earth. "They are small people with small minds. Their words do not change who I am." Ethan absorbed that. "You're stronger than me," he said quietly. Mei Lin stopped. She straightened slowly, meeting his gaze across the garden plot. "No," she said. "I am just used to it." Something in her voice made Ethan's chest tighten. He wanted to say more. Wanted to apologize for the town, for his own disappointment, for every moment since she'd stepped off that stagecoach where he'd failed to see her clearly. But the words wouldn't come, so he just nodded and walked toward the barn. Behind him, Mei Lin returned to her work. The spade hit earth with a steady rhythm, relentless, refusing to stop. 3 weeks became a month, and the ranch developed a rhythm neither of them had planned. Ethan worked the land like he always had, sunrise to sunset, fixing what broke, managing cattle that seemed determined to destroy every fence he built. But now when he returned to the cabin at dusk, there was food waiting, hot coffee, a fire already burning against the evening chill. Small things, practical things. Nothing romantic about any of it. Mei Lin moved through the house like she was cataloging its failures. The warped floorboards, the windows that rattled in their frames, the stove that needed constant adjustment to maintain even heat. She didn't complain, but Ethan could see her taking note of everything that needed fixing. He'd catch her sometimes, standing in the doorway at dawn, staring out at the mountains with an expression he couldn't read. Not sadness exactly, something deeper, like she was measuring the distance between where she'd been and where she'd ended up, trying to decide if the trade had been worth it. He never asked. The silence between them had grown comfortable in its own strange way. Not companionship. Ethan had given up pretending this was anything like the partnership he'd imagined. But it wasn't hostile either, just two people occupying the same space, making it work because the alternative was worse. Then Jacob Pritchard showed up. It was a Saturday morning, unseasonably warm for early autumn. Ethan was in the barn checking a mare's hoof when he heard the wagon approaching. He straightened, squinting into the sunlight. Jacob pulled up in front of the house, his wife Sarah beside him, their 2 children bouncing in the back. The whole family wore their church clothes, Sarah in a yellow dress that looked like she'd spent hours pressing it, the kids scrubbed clean and already fidgeting. "Brooks," Jacob called, waving. "You hiding in there?" Ethan walked out, wiping his hands on his pants. "Didn't know you were coming by." Spur of the moment. Jacob climbed down, offering his hand. Sarah insisted, said it wasn't Christian to let your new wife go a month without proper welcoming. Ethan's stomach tightened. "That's not necessary." "Nonsense!" Sarah was already descending from the wagon, carrying a covered basket. Every bride deserves a proper introduction to her neighbors. Before Ethan could form a protest, Mei Lin emerged from the house. She'd been washing clothes in the yard. Her sleeves were rolled up, her hands still damp. She stopped when she saw the visitors, her expression carefully neutral. Sarah's smile faltered for just a moment. The briefest hesitation. Then she recovered, crossing the yard with forced brightness. "You must be Mei Lin. I'm Sarah Pritchard. We own the ranch just north of here." Mei Lin dried her hands on her apron. "Mrs. Pritchard?" "Oh, call me Sarah, please." She thrust the basket forward. "I brought some preserves and fresh bread. Thought you might appreciate something sweet after settling in." "Thank you." Mei Lin accepted the basket with both hands, her posture straight. "That is kind." An awkward pause settled over the yard. Jacob cleared his throat. Fine piece of land you've got here, Brooks. How are the cattle handling the heat? Well enough. Ethan forced himself to focus. Lost one calf to coyotes last week, but the rest are solid. Most coyotes are brutal this year, Jacob agreed, clearly grateful for familiar ground. We've been setting traps, but the bastards are smart. Jacob, Sarah chided, glancing at the children. Right. Sorry. The two men fell into talk about predators and water sources and the price of beef, their voices filling the uncomfortable silence. Sarah turned back to Mei Lin, her smile bright and brittle. So, how are you finding Wyoming? Must be quite different from San Francisco. Yes, Mei Lin said simply. I imagine the winters will be hardest. It's terribly cold out here. Do you have warm clothes? I will manage. Another pause. Sarah's smile strained at the edges. Well, if you need anything, fabric for sewing, advice about the stores in town, please don't hesitate to call on me. It can be lonely out here for women. Important to have friends. Mei Lin's expression didn't change. I am not afraid of being alone. The words landed with more weight than Mei Lin probably intended. Sarah blinked. Oh, of course. I just meant... I appreciate the bread, Mei Lin said, not unkindly. It was thoughtful of you to bring it. Sarah nodded, her smile fading into something more genuine. Uncertain, but real. You're welcome. The Pritchard children had wandered toward the corral, fascinated by the horses. Their daughter, maybe 7 years old, pressed her face between the fence rails. That one's pretty, she called. What's her name? Ethan glanced over. Haven't named her. Why not? She's livestock, Jenny, not a pet. But she should have a name, the girl insisted. Everything should have a name. Mei Lin walked toward the corral, and Ethan felt his shoulders tense without knowing why. She stopped beside the girl, studying the mare, a dappled gray with white stockings and a stubborn temperament. What would you name her? Mei Lin asked. Jenny considered this seriously. Maybe Daisy, because of the white spots? Daisy is a good name. Mei Lin's voice softened in a way Ethan had never heard before. Strong and simple. Do you like horses? Jenny asked. I've not spent much time with them. In San Francisco, there were only wagon horses. Working animals. These are working animals too, Jenny said matter-of-factly. But Papa says you can still be nice to them. The corner of Mei Lin's mouth lifted. Not quite a smile, but close. Sarah called for the children, her tone gentle but firm. Come along, you two. We've taken enough of the Brooks' time. Jacob shook Ethan's hand again. Good seeing you. We should get together soon, maybe help each other with the fence repairs before winter. Yeah. Maybe. As the Pritchard family climbed back into their wagon, Sarah leaned toward Mei Lin. Truly, if you need anything, I will remember, Mei Lin said. Thank you. The wagon rolled away, dust rising in its wake. Ethan and Mei Lin stood in the yard, watching until it disappeared over the ridge. She means well, Ethan said finally. I know. But? Mei Lin turned to look at him. She is afraid of me. That's not... It is true. Mei Lin's voice was calm, factual. She does not know what to do with someone like me. So she tries to be kind, but the fear is underneath. I can see it. Ethan wanted to argue, but the words stuck in his throat. Because she was right. Does that bother you? He asked quietly. Mei Lin considered this. No. Fear, I understand. It is better than hatred. She picked up the basket Sarah had brought and carried it inside. Ethan stayed in the yard, staring at the mountains, wondering how someone could speak about fear and hatred so casually, like they were weather, just facts of life to be endured. That night, he lay in the barn listening to the wind rattle the boards and thought about the way Mei Lin's voice had softened when she spoke to the Pritchard girl. Strong and simple. He'd never heard her sound like that before. The next morning, he found her in the kitchen, kneading bread dough with methodical precision. You don't have to make bread, he said. I can buy it in town. Store bread is expensive. She didn't look up from her work. And not as good. Ethan poured himself coffee from the pot she'd left warming on the stove. Where'd you learn to bake? The laundry house. Some of the women taught me. Said it was important to know how to make food last. They were right. Mei Lin shaped the dough into a round, set it aside to rise. She wiped her hands clean, then turned to face him. I need to ask you something. Ethan's grip tightened on his coffee cup. All right. The stallion in the far pasture, the black one with the white blaze, why is he separated from the others? Diablo? Ethan frowned. Because he's mean as hell. Threw 2 handlers last year. One broke his collarbone, the other lost 3 teeth. I keep him isolated until I can figure out what to do with him. What will you do? Ethan shrugged. Sell him, probably, or shoot him if it comes to that. Can't have an animal that dangerous around. Mei Lin's expression shifted. You would kill him for being afraid? I'd kill him for being a threat. It is the same thing. She crossed her arms. Animals act out when they are frightened, when they do not trust. Maybe, but I don't have time to rehabilitate every broken horse on this ranch. Then let me try. Ethan stared at her. What? Let me work with him. I will not ask you to help. I will not take time from your other work. But let me try. Mei Lin, that horse is dangerous. So am I, apparently. Her voice held no humor. The town thinks so. You thought so when I first arrived. But I am still here. Ethan set down his coffee cup. That's different. How? Because you're... He stopped, struggling for words. You're a person. You can choose to be calm. That horse only knows violence. Perhaps because violence is all he has been shown. Mei Lin moved to the window, looking out toward the distant pasture. I understand what it is like to be judged before anyone knows you. To be seen as a problem that needs solving. The words hung in the air between them. Ethan's chest tightened. I never said... You did not have to. She turned back to him, her expression open in a way it rarely was. I am not angry. I am simply asking for a chance. The same chance you are giving me by not sending me back. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. If he hurts you, then that is my choice to make. They stared at each other across the kitchen. Finally, Ethan exhaled. Fine, but you stay outside the fence until I'm convinced he won't kill you. Agreed. That afternoon, Ethan watched from a distance as Mei Lin approached Diablo's corral. The stallion stood at the far end, black coat gleaming in the sunlight. His ears flattened the moment he saw her. Mei Lin didn't rush. She moved to the fence rail and simply stood there, hands loose at her sides. Waiting. Diablo snorted, tossing his head. Mei Lin didn't react. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The horse took a single step forward, stopped. Ears still flat. Mei Lin remained motionless. Ethan shifted his weight, uncomfortable with how exposed she looked. One wrong move and that horse could charge the fence, could rear up and bring those hooves down. But Mei Lin just stood there, patient, unafraid. After 20 minutes, Diablo took another step. Then another. His ears lifted slightly. Mei Lin's posture didn't change, but Ethan saw her shoulders ease. Just a fraction. The stallion approached the fence, stopped 3 feet away. His nostrils flared. Mei Lin waited. Finally, slowly, she extended one hand. Palm up. Not reaching, just offering. Diablo's ears flicked forward. He stretched his neck, closing the distance inch by careful inch until his muzzle brushed her fingertips. Mei Lin didn't move. The horse exhaled, a long, shuddering breath, and lowered his head. Ethan's chest constricted. He'd worked with horses his entire life, knew their moods, their signals, the subtle language of prey animals, learning to trust predators. What he was watching shouldn't have been possible. Mei Lin stood with that dangerous stallion for another 10 minutes, neither moving, just breathing the same air. Then she stepped back, lowered her hand, turned, and walked away without looking back. Diablo watched her go, ears forward, head still lowered, calm. When Mei Lin reached the house, Ethan was waiting. How did you do that? He asked. She shrugged. I did nothing. I simply did not make him more afraid. That's not... Ethan shook his head. People spend months training horses. You were out there less than an hour. Because I was not trying to train him. I was trying to show him I was not a threat. She met his gaze steadily. There is a difference. Ethan absorbed that. You've done this before, he said. It wasn't a question. No, but I have been the frightened one enough times to recognize it in others. She walked past him into the house, leaving Ethan standing in the yard with a feeling he couldn't name sitting heavy in his chest. The next Sunday, Ethan rode into town for supplies. He'd been putting it off, dreading the inevitable comments, but the flour was running low and the coffee had run out entirely. The general store was busy, families stocking up after church, women clustered near the fabric section, men discussing the coming winter. Ethan grabbed what he needed quickly, keeping his head down. He almost made it out without incident. "Brooks!" Thomas McAllister stood near the door, arms crossed. The man who'd first shown Ethan that matrimonial advertisement. Ethan nodded. "Thomas, how's things at the ranch?" "Fine." "And the wife?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Also fine." Thomas stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Listen, I know it didn't turn out how you expected, but you can still fix this." "Fix what?" "Send her back. Tell the agency there was a mistake. They'll place her somewhere else, maybe with minors up north who don't care what she looks like. You can request someone new, someone more appropriate." Ethan's hands clenched around the bag of flour. "She's my wife." "On paper, sure, but you haven't—" Thomas made a vague gesture. "You know, made it legal. You could still get an annulment." "I'm not sending her back." "Why not?" Thomas's voice sharpened. "Pride? Because you're embarrassed? Better to cut your losses now than spend the rest of your life with what?" Ethan's voice dropped dangerously low. "Say it." Thomas held up his hands. "I'm just trying to help." "You're a decent man, Brooks. You deserve better than charity." "I didn't ask for charity. I asked for a wife. That's what I got." "That's not a wife," Thomas said flatly. "That's a burden you're too stubborn to admit." Ethan set the flour down carefully, slowly. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, controlled. "Maylin works harder than any person I've ever met. She doesn't complain, doesn't demand anything. She shows up every day and does what needs doing without being asked. So if you're suggesting I send her away because she doesn't fit your idea of what a wife should look like, you can go to hell." Thomas's eyes widened. The store had gone silent. Every conversation stopped. Ethan picked up his supplies and walked out. His hands were shaking. He rode home with Thomas's words circling in his head like vultures. "That's a burden you're too stubborn to admit." Was she? He'd thought so those first few weeks, thought she was a mistake he'd been too proud to correct. But somewhere along the way, something had shifted. He thought about the way she'd stood in front of Diablo's corral, the patience in her stillness, the way she'd offered her hand without fear, trusting the animal to make its own choice. He thought about the bread cooling on the kitchen counter every morning, the firewood stacked neatly outside the door, the garden plot she'd carved out of hard ground with nothing but a spade and determination. Small things, practical things, but they added up to something. When he reached the ranch, Maylin was working with Diablo again. This time she was inside the corral. Ethan's heart stopped. He dismounted fast, striding toward the fence. "What are you doing?" Maylin glanced over. "What we agreed. I am working with him." "I said stay outside the fence." "That was 3 days ago. We have moved past that stage." "Maylin, he will not hurt me." Her voice was calm, certain. "Watch." Diablo stood beside her, close enough to touch. His head was lowered, ears relaxed. As Ethan watched, Maylin lifted one hand and placed it on the stallion's neck. The horse didn't flinch. She stroked his coat slowly, speaking in low tones Ethan couldn't make out. The stallion's eyes half closed. Ethan's pulse hammered in his throat. "This is insane," he said. "This is trust." Maylin continued her gentle movements. "Something you in this town know very little about." The words stung more than they should have. Ethan gripped the fence rail. "If something goes wrong, then I will handle it, just as I handle everything else." She looked at him then, her expression unreadable. "You do not need to protect me, Ethan. I have survived worse than a frightened horse." "That's not—" He stopped, frustrated. "You can't just—" "Cannot what? Take risks? Make my own choices?" Her voice sharpened. "I am not a child, and I am not fragile. The sooner you understand that, the easier this will be for both of us." Diablo shifted, sensing the tension. Maylin immediately refocused on the horse, her posture softening. The stallion settled. Ethan watched for another moment, then turned and walked to the barn. His chest felt tight. His thoughts were a mess. He didn't know if he was angry or impressed or terrified, maybe all three. That evening, Mei-Lin cooked a stew with vegetables from her garden and salt pork from the stores. They ate in silence. Finally, Ethan set down his spoon. "I'm sorry." Mei-Lin looked up. "For what?" "For treating you like you need to be managed. Like you're—" He struggled for words. "Like you're something I have to fix." She studied him for a long moment. "You are afraid of me." "I'm not. Not of me physically, of what I represent." She set down her own spoon. "I am not what you wanted, not what you imagined, and that frightens you because it means you made a mistake." Ethan's throat tightened. "I don't think you're a mistake." "But you did. When I first arrived, you looked at me and thought, this is wrong." He wanted to deny it, couldn't. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I did." Mei-Lin nodded slowly. "At least you are honest now." "And you?" Ethan leaned forward. "What did you think when you saw me?" She considered this. "I thought you looked sad, lonely, like you had been waiting for something to save you." "Were you disappointed?" "No." Her voice was matter-of-fact. "I was relieved." "Relieved?" "That you were not cruel, that you did not look at me with hatred." She picked up her spoon again. "I have learned to be grateful for the absence of cruelty. Everything else is a gift." The words settled over Ethan like a weight. He thought about the town's laughter, the way Sarah Pritchard's smile had faltered, Thomas's suggestion to send her back like defective merchandise. "What happened in San Francisco?" he asked quietly. "In the laundry house?" Mei-Lin's expression closed. "I worked. That is all." "That's not all." She was silent for a long moment. Then, "The men who owned the laundry house were not kind. They took most of our wages, said it was for room and board. Some of the women—" She paused. "Some of them had other ways of making money, ways the owners encouraged." Ethan's stomach turned. "Did they—" "No." Her voice was firm. "I was strong enough to say no, and ugly enough that they did not push." "You're not ugly." The words came out before Ethan could stop them. Mei-Lin's eyes snapped to his. The air between them changed. "I mean," Ethan fumbled, "you're not what I expected, but that doesn't make you ugly. It just makes you different." "Different," Mei-Lin repeated slowly. "Is that better or worse than ugly?" "It's honest." She held his gaze for a moment longer, then looked away. "Honesty is something, I suppose." They finished dinner without speaking again, but something had shifted. Later that night, Ethan lay in the barn and thought about the way Mei-Lin had described herself. Strong enough to say no, ugly enough that they did not push, like her appearance had been protection, armor, like she'd spent years believing her worth was measured by how little trouble she caused. The thought made his chest ache. 2 days later, Samuel Porter showed up at the ranch. Ethan was replacing boards on the corral fence when he heard the horse approaching. He looked up, saw Samuel dismounting, and his shoulders tensed. "Porter, what do you want?" "Friendly visit." Samuel's grin was sharp. "Heard you had words with Thomas McAllister." "Did you?" "Whole town heard." Samuel leaned against the fence. "Standing up for your Chinese bride. Real touching, Brooks." Ethan drove a nail into the board with more force than necessary. "State your business or leave." "Just wondering if you've thought it through." Samuel's voice turned casual. "What it means keeping her. People are starting to wonder if you're trying to make some kind of point." "What point would that be?" "That you don't care what anyone thinks. That you're above the rest of us." Samuel's grin faded. "Problem is, you're not. You're just a stubborn fool who can't admit when he's made a mistake." Ethan set down the hammer. "You done?" "Not quite." Samuel straightened. "See, some of us are starting to think maybe you're dangerous. Maybe having a Chinese woman on a respectable ranch sets a bad precedent, opens doors that should stay closed." "Dangerous," Ethan repeated flatly. "That's right. Dangerous to the community, to our values, to—" "Get off my land." Samuel blinked. "What?" "I said get off my land." Ethan's voice was quiet, cold, before I throw you off." They stared at each other. Samuel's hand drifted toward his belt, where a pistol sat in its holster. Ethan didn't move. Finally, Samuel smiled. Ugly. "You keep making enemies, Brooks. See where that gets you." He mounted his horse and rode off, dust rising in his wake. Ethan stood in the yard, hands clenched, watching until Samuel disappeared. When he turned back toward the house, Mei Lin was standing in the doorway. "How much did you hear?" he asked. "Enough? I'm sorry." "For what?" She walked toward him. "For defending me? Or for making more enemies?" "Both, I guess. Do not apologize for defending me." Her voice was firm. "I have spent too much of my life being defended by silence. Words are better." Ethan absorbed that. "What if words aren't enough? Then we will find out what is." She met his gaze evenly. Together. The word hung between them. Together. Not two separate people occupying the same space. Actually, together. Ethan nodded slowly. "Yeah. All right." Mei Lin's expression softened, just a fraction, and she turned back toward the house. Ethan watched her go, feeling something shift in his chest, something that felt dangerously close to hope. The heat broke 2 days later with a storm that turned the sky the color of old bruises. Ethan had been watching the clouds build all morning, that particular tension in the air that meant trouble. By noon, the wind had picked up, carrying the smell of rain and electricity. "We need to get the cattle down from the ridge," he told Mei Lin over a hurried lunch. "Storm like this, they'll scatter, could lose half the herd if they spook into the canyon." Mei Lin stood immediately. "I will help." "You don't know how to herd cattle." "Then teach me quickly." Ethan opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. There wasn't time. "Stay behind me. Follow my lead. If something goes wrong, get out of the way." Understood. They saddled 2 horses, Ethan on his reliable bay gelding, Mei Lin on the mare she'd named Daisy. The horse had taken to her with surprising ease, responding to Mei Lin's calm commands like they'd been working together for years. The ride up to the ridge took 20 minutes. The wind grew stronger with every passing moment, whipping Mei Lin's braid against her back, making the horses nervous. The cattle were restless, sensing the storm. Ethan counted quickly, 43 head, most of them clustered near the tree line, a few stragglers already drifting toward the canyon edge. "We need to turn them back toward the ranch," he called over the wind. "Push them slow. If they run, we've lost them." Mei Lin nodded, positioning Daisy on the far side of the herd. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Ethan urged his horse forward, moving the nearest cattle with practiced ease. They shifted reluctantly, heads low, eyes rolling white. Mei Lin mirrored his movements on the opposite side, her posture tense but controlled. For 10 minutes, it worked. The herd began moving downhill, away from the canyon, back toward safer ground. Then lightning split the sky. The crack was deafening, followed immediately by thunder that seemed to shake the earth itself. The cattle exploded into panic. 43 animals, each weighing over 1,000 pounds, bolted in every direction. Ethan's horse reared, nearly throwing him. He fought for control, shouting commands that were swallowed by the chaos. Through the dust and confusion, he saw Mei Lin. She'd stayed mounted somehow. Daisy was spinning, eyes wild, but Mei Lin held her steady with hands and voice. 3 cattle had broken away from the main group, charging straight for the canyon edge. Mei Lin kicked Daisy forward. "No!" Ethan's scream was lost in the storm. She rode directly into the path of the running cattle, blocking their route. It was insane. Suicidal. One misstep and she'd be trampled, or worse, knocked over the cliff. But Daisy didn't falter. Mei Lin's voice cut through the noise, not loud, but commanding. She pushed the mare sideways, forcing the cattle to veer left, away from the drop. The animals scattered, rejoining the main herd. Mei Lin pulled Daisy to a stop, her face pale but set. Ethan reached her just as the rain started, heavy drops that turned instantly into a downpour, soaking them both in seconds. "What the hell were you thinking?" he shouted. "They were going over the edge. Better to lose 3 cattle than lose you." Mei Lin stared at him, rain streaming down her face. "They are your livelihood. I was not going to let them die because I was afraid." "Afraid?" Ethan's voice cracked. "You should be afraid. That was necessary." She cut him off. "It was necessary, and I did it. We can argue about it when we are not drowning. She was right. The rain was coming down in sheets now, visibility dropping to nothing. The cattle had scattered, but were no longer running toward the canyon. That was something. We need to get them down, Ethan said, forcing himself to focus. Stay with me this time. No more heroics. Mei Lin's jaw tightened, but she nodded. They worked in the rain for another hour, slowly gathering the herd and pushing them toward lower ground. By the time they got the last animal into the home pasture, both of them were soaked through, shivering despite the work. Ethan secured the gate while Mei Lin dismounted, her movements stiff. You hurt? He asked. No, just cold. They led the horses to the barn in silence. The rain had settled into a steady drumming against the roof, lightning still flickering in the distance, but the worst of the storm moving east. Ethan unsaddled both horses while Mei Lin rubbed them down. His hands were clumsy, fumbling with buckles. He couldn't stop seeing her charging toward those cattle, putting herself between 1,000 pounds of panicked animal and a cliff edge. That was the stupidest thing I've ever seen, he said finally. Mei Lin didn't look up from brushing Daisy. It worked. You could have died. But I did not. That's not the point. Then what is the point? She turned to face him, still holding the brush. That I should have let them go? Should have stayed safe while your cattle died? Yes, they're just animals. They are your life. Her voice sharpened. Everything you have built, everything you work for, it depends on those animals. I was not going to stand by and watch you lose that. Ethan's throat constricted. I don't need you to sacrifice yourself for a few head of cattle. It is not about need. Mei Lin set down the brush carefully. It is about being useful, about earning my place here. The words hit him like a fist. You think you have to earn? He stopped, trying to organize his thoughts. Mei Lin, you don't owe me anything. You being here, that's enough. Is it? She held his gaze. You never wanted me here. Not really. So I must prove my worth every day. Through work, through usefulness, through not being a burden. I never said you were a burden. You did not have to say it. Her voice was quiet now, tired. I could see it in your face every time you looked at me. Every time someone in town made a comment and you stayed silent. Every time you slept in the barn instead of the house. Ethan felt something crack open in his chest. That's not... He struggled for words. I was trying to be respectful, to give you space. I do not need space. Mei Lin's hands clenched. I need to know if you regret bringing me here. If every day you wake up and wish you had never sent that letter. The rain drummed against the barn roof. Ethan took a breath, then another. I did regret it, he said quietly. Those first few weeks. I looked at you and thought I'd made a terrible mistake, that I'd been a fool for thinking a mail-order bride could fix anything. Mei Lin's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes flickered. But somewhere along the way, Ethan continued, that changed. I don't know exactly when. Maybe when I saw you work. Or when you stood up to that horse everyone said was too dangerous. Or when you didn't flinch from Samuel Porter's threats. He paused. Or maybe it was just today, watching you risk your life for cattle that aren't even yours. They are ours, Mei Lin said softly. If this is my home, then they are ours. Ethan's chest tightened. I don't regret bringing you here, he said. Not anymore. And I'm sorry it took me this long to figure that out. They stood in the dim light of the barn, rain falling outside, horses shifting in their stalls. Mei Lin's posture softened. I have been alone most of my life. Even before my father died. He worked all the time, and when he was home, he was too tired to speak. The women at the laundry house, they were kind, but everyone was struggling too much to form real friendships. She looked down at her hands. So I learned to be useful, to make myself valuable through work because that was the only currency I had. You're valuable just by existing, Ethan said. Mei Lin's mouth quirked. That is a nice thing to say, but it is not true. Not in the world we live in. Then maybe the world's wrong. She looked at him for a long moment, something unreadable in her expression. You are different than I expected, she said finally. Yeah, well, you too. The corner of her mouth lifted, not quite a smile, but close. They finished caring for the horses in companionable silence, then ran through the rain to the house. Inside, Maylin immediately started a fire while Ethan stripped off his soaked shirt. She glanced over, then quickly looked away, color rising in her cheeks. "I will make tea," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "You should change first. You're shivering." "So are you." "I don't have dry clothes in the house. They're all in the barn." Maylin hesitated, then disappeared into the bedroom. She emerged a few minutes later wearing a dry dress, her hair loose and damp around her shoulders. Ethan had seen her hair down before, briefly, in passing, but never like this. Never in the warm light of the fire, never with her defenses lowered. She looked younger, softer, still strong, but somehow more human. "You are staring," she said. Ethan jerked his gaze away. "Sorry." "It is fine." She moved to the stove, preparing tea with practiced efficiency. "I'm not used to people looking at me without judgment. It is strange." "I'm not judging." "I know." She poured hot water into cups. "That is what makes it strange." They sat at the table, warming their hands on the tea. The rain continued outside, gentler now, settling into the kind of steady rhythm that made the world feel smaller, safer. "Tell me about your father," Ethan said. Maylin's hand stilled on her cup. "Why?" "Because you never talk about him. And I want to know." She was quiet for a long moment. "He was a hard man," she said finally. "Not cruel, but hard. He believed in work above everything else. When we came to America, he thought it would be different, that we could build something better." Her voice flattened. "But the railroad used him up. 12, 14-hour days in conditions that killed men regularly. He survived 3 years. Then his lungs gave out." "I'm sorry." Maylin shrugged. "He would have said it was worth it. He believed suffering had value, that it made you stronger." "Do you believe that?" She considered this. "I believe suffering teaches you what you can survive, but I do not think it makes you stronger. I think it just makes you tired." Ethan absorbed that. "You don't seem tired." "I am very good at hiding it." The honesty in her voice made his chest ache. "You don't have to hide anything here," he said quietly. Maylin looked at him, firelight reflecting in her dark eyes. "Yes, I do. If I let myself stop even for a moment, I'm afraid I will not be able to start again." Ethan recognized that feeling, knew it intimately. "Then we'll both keep moving," he said, "until we figure out how to stop without falling apart." Maylin's expression softened. "That sounds exhausting." "Yeah." He managed a tired smile. "It does." They finished their tea in silence, the fire crackling, the rain drumming a steady rhythm overhead. For the first time since Maylin had arrived, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt almost peaceful. The next morning dawned clear and cool, the storm having scrubbed the air clean. Ethan woke in the barn to sunlight streaming through the gaps in the boards. His body ached from yesterday's work, but it was the good kind of ache, the kind that came from honest labor. When he walked to the house, Maylin was already in the yard working with Diablo. The transformation was remarkable. The stallion that had been wild and dangerous 3 weeks ago now stood calmly while Maylin brushed his coat. His ears were forward, eyes half closed in contentment. She'd done it, actually gentled him. "Morning," Ethan called. Maylin glanced over. "Good morning. The herd is settled. I checked them at dawn." "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to make sure none were injured from yesterday." Ethan leaned against the fence, watching her work. "How long have you been out here?" "Since sunrise." "You sleep at all?" "Some." She ran the brush down Diablo's flank. "Sleep, and I have never been close friends." Ethan understood that too. "I was thinking," he said slowly, "maybe it's time I moved back into the house." Maylin's hand paused mid-stroke. "Why?" "Because sleeping in the barn is ridiculous. And because," he struggled for the right words, "because we're supposed to be married. And married people don't live in separate buildings." "We are married on paper," Maylin said carefully. "That is different than being truly married." "Maybe, but we could try." He met her gaze. "Really try. Not just going through the motions." Maylin set down the brush. "What does that mean?" "I don't know exactly, but I know it means more than what we've been doing." Ethan took a breath. I know I haven't been fair to you. I brought you here with expectations I never told you about, then held it against you when you didn't meet them. That was wrong. You were honest yesterday, Mei Lin said. That is more than most people manage. Honesty's a start, but it's not enough. Then what is enough? Ethan thought about that. About the way she'd charged toward those cattle without hesitation. About the hours she'd spent with Diablo, patient and unafraid. About the small, quiet ways she'd made this place feel less like a prison and more like something that might become a home. I don't know, he admitted, but I'd like to find out, if you're willing. Mei Lin studied him for a long moment. I am willing, she said finally. But I have conditions. All right. You do not lie to me, even when the truth is uncomfortable. I can do that. And you do not hide in silence when things are difficult. I've had enough of silence. Ethan nodded. Agreed. And you stop sleeping in the barn. It is foolish and unnecessary. The corner of his mouth lifted. That one I can definitely manage. Mei Lin's expression softened. Then we will try. They shook hands across the fence. Formal, slightly awkward, but genuine. It wasn't romance, wasn't anything close to what Ethan had imagined when he'd first written that letter. But it was real. That afternoon, Ethan moved his belongings back into the house. It didn't take long. He didn't own much. A change of clothes, a razor, a book he'd never finished reading, everything fit in a single crate. Mei Lin watched from the doorway as he set the crate down in the bedroom. We can divide the space, she said. I will take the left side, you take the right. That works? They arranged things in silence. Mei Lin's trunk on one side, Ethan's crate on the other, a clear line down the middle of the small room. It felt strange, intimate in a way that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with proximity, with sharing space that had always been private. That night they ate dinner together at the table, then sat by the fire while Mei Lin mended one of Ethan's shirts. You don't have to do that, he said. The tear will get worse if I do not. I can mend my own shirts. She looked at him skeptically. Can you? Ethan thought about the pile of clothes in the barn with buttons missing and seams coming apart. Badly. Then let me do it well. He watched her work, the needle moving with quick, precise movements, her expression focused. There was something meditative about it. Peaceful. Where'd you learn to sew like that? He asked. My mother taught me, before she died. How old were you? 8? Mei Lin tied off a knot, bit the thread. She was sick for a long time, but before that she made beautiful things. Embroidered silk, decorative pieces. She said every stitch should be perfect because sloppy work dishonors the fabric. That sounds hard, for an 8-year-old. It was. Mei Lin smoothed the mended fabric. But it was also useful. When my father and I came to America, sewing was one of the few skills I had that people valued. Do you still make beautiful things? She looked at him, surprised. What do you mean? You said your mother made beautiful things. Embroidered silk. Do you still do that? No? Her voice was quiet. There has not been time for beautiful things. Only necessary ones. Ethan absorbed that. Maybe there could be time now. Mei Lin's expression shifted. Maybe. She finished the shirt and handed it back to him. Later, lying in the dark on opposite sides of the room, Ethan listened to her breathing settle into the rhythm of sleep. It should have been awkward, uncomfortable. Instead, it just felt right, like something clicking into place that had been misaligned for a long time. The week that followed was the best Ethan had experienced in years, not because anything dramatic happened, just the opposite. It was the small things. The way Mei Lin had coffee ready when he woke up. The way he started fixing things around the house without being asked. The warped floorboards, the rattling windows, the stove that never held temperature. The way they fell into an easy rhythm of work, each handling their tasks without needing to coordinate. They talked more. Not about anything deep, just daily observations, plans for the ranch, stories about their pasts. Ethan learned that Mei Lin could identify birds by their calls, that she hated the taste of whiskey but liked beer, that she'd never learned to swim because there'd never been safe water. Mei Lin learned that Ethan had wanted to be a school teacher when he was young, that he could play the harmonica badly, That his father had died when Ethan was 16 and left him this ranch out of obligation more than affection. Small things. Human things. They didn't solve anything fundamental. Didn't erase the town's judgment or Ethan's initial disappointment or the fact that they'd started this marriage as strangers. But they made it easier, made the future seem less like an obligation and more like a possibility. Then Samuel Porter came back. It was a Saturday afternoon. Ethan was in the barn shoeing one of the horses when he heard multiple riders approaching. He straightened, tension immediately coiling in his gut. Samuel rode at the head of a group. 5 men, all armed, all wearing expressions that made Ethan's skin crawl. He walked out to meet them, keeping his hands visible. "Porter, what do you want?" "We need to talk." Samuel dismounted, the other men staying on their horses. "About your situation." "My situation." "The Chinese woman." Samuel's voice was carefully neutral. "Some folks in town are concerned." "Concerned about what?" "About the precedent it sets. Having someone like her on a respectable ranch makes people think maybe it's acceptable to bring in more." Samuel glanced toward the house. "And we can't have that." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Maylin is my wife. She's not going anywhere." "See? That's the problem." Samuel stepped closer. "You keep saying that, but nobody believes it. And the longer she stays, the more it looks like you're trying to make some kind of statement." "I'm not making a statement. I'm living my life." "Your life affects the rest of us," one of the other men called. "Can't have Chinamen thinking they're welcome here." "She's not a Chinaman. She's a woman. And she's staying." Samuel sighed like he was dealing with a stubborn child. "We were hoping you'd be reasonable about this." "I am being reasonable." "Then you won't mind us talking to her directly." Ethan's blood went cold. "Don't!" But Samuel was already walking toward the house. Ethan moved to block him, and suddenly there were hands on his arms. 2 of the other men had dismounted, grabbing him before he could react. "Let me go!" "Just want to have a conversation," Samuel said mildly. "Nothing to get worked up about." He knocked on the door. Maylin answered, her expression calm until she saw the men holding Ethan. "What is this?" she asked quietly. "Just wanted to introduce ourselves properly," Samuel said. "Make sure you understand how things work around here." "I understand perfectly." Maylin's voice was steady. "You are afraid of me. So you bring men with guns to frighten me into leaving." Samuel's smile faltered. "We're not afraid of you." "Then why are there 5 of you?" She looked past him to where Ethan struggled against the grip holding him. "And why do you need to restrain my husband to speak with me?" "Your husband," Samuel repeated. "That's a generous term for whatever arrangement you two have." "We are married, legally. Whatever you think of that does not change the fact." One of the men on horseback spat on the ground. "Ain't no real marriage, just a rancher who got desperate and a Chinese girl who needed a place to stay." Maylin's expression didn't change. "And what concern is that of yours?" "It's our concern because you don't belong here," Samuel said flatly. "This is a white man's territory, has been since the first settlers arrived. We don't need you polluting it." The words hung in the air. Ethan felt rage building in his chest. "Get your hands off me." The men holding him tightened their grip. Samuel took a step closer to Maylin. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to pack your things and leave, quietly, without making a fuss. And Brooks here is going to let you go without argument." "No," Maylin said simply. Samuel blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said no, I am not leaving. This is my home." "This isn't your home. This isn't even your country." "It is now." Maylin's voice was calm, unwavering. "I am an American citizen. I have legal rights, and you have no authority to make me leave." "Rights?" Samuel laughed. "You think rights matter out here? You think some piece of paper is going to protect you?" "I think the law matters, even on the frontier." "The law is whatever we say it is." "Then you are admitting you are criminals," Maylin said evenly. "That you have come to threaten me with violence unless I submit to your illegal demands." Samuel's face darkened. "Watch your mouth." "Or what? You will hurt me? Kill me?" She didn't flinch. "That will not make me less Chinese. It will only make you murderers." The air went cold. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. "Maylin, don't." "Your wife has a smart mouth," Samuel said quietly. "Someone should teach her to keep it shut." He raised his hand. Mei Lin didn't move, and then the world exploded into chaos. Before Samuel's hand could connect with Mei Lin's face, a black shape erupted from behind the house. Diablo! The stallion charged with the fury of something that had remembered what violence felt like and refused to let it happen again. His hooves struck the ground like thunder, ears flat against his skull, teeth bared. Samuel stumbled backward, eyes wide with shock. The men holding Ethan released him instantly, scrambling for their horses as Diablo reared up, front hooves slashing the air inches from Samuel's head. "Jesus Christ!" one of them shouted. The stallion landed and spun, putting himself between Mei Lin and the men, muscles coiled and ready. His eyes were wild, but his positioning was deliberate, protective. Mei Lin stood perfectly still behind him, one hand outstretched but not touching. "Easy," she said softly. "Easy, Diablo." The horse's ears flicked back toward her voice, but he didn't move, didn't stop watching the men who'd threatened her. Samuel backed toward his horse, his face pale. "That animal should be put down." "That animal," Mei Lin said quietly, "knows the difference between threat and safety. Perhaps you should learn the same." The other men were already mounting, hands on their weapons, but clearly unwilling to test the stallion's rage. Ethan moved to stand beside Mei Lin, his fists still clenched. "Get off my land! Now!" "This isn't over," Samuel said, swinging into his saddle. "You're making a mistake, Brooks." "The only mistake was opening my door to you." Samuel's jaw worked, but he didn't respond. He wheeled his horse around and spurred it hard. The other men followed, dust rising as they thundered down the drive. The moment they disappeared over the ridge, Diablo's posture relaxed. His ears came forward, and he lowered his head, snorting softly. Mei Lin stepped forward and placed her hand on his neck. "Thank you," she whispered. The horse leaned into her touch, all the violence draining out of him like water. Ethan's hands were shaking. Adrenaline still flooded his system, making everything feel sharp and unreal. "How did he know?" he asked. "He was in the pasture behind the house. He heard the voices." Mei Lin stroked Diablo's mane. "Animals understand threat better than people do. They do not need words to know when violence is coming." "They could have shot him." "They could have." She looked at Ethan, her expression calm but her eyes reflecting something deeper. But they were too afraid. Fear makes people hesitate. Ethan stared at her. At this woman who'd just faced down 5 armed men without flinching, who'd spoken about violence and murder with the same steady voice she used to discuss the weather. "You weren't afraid," he said. "I was terrified." Mei Lin's voice was quiet. "But I have learned that showing fear to men like that is the same as inviting them to hurt you. So I do not show it." The word settled over Ethan like a weight. "This isn't over," he said. "Samuel meant it. They'll come back." "I know." "We should leave, go somewhere else. Montana maybe, or Colorado. Somewhere they don't know us." Mei Lin shook her head. "No. Mei Lin, I have run before. From San Francisco, from the laundry house, from every place that tried to make me smaller than I am." Her voice hardened. "I will not run again. This is my home now. If they want me gone, they will have to drag me." "They might." "Then we will make it difficult for them." Ethan looked at her, at the set of her jaw, the steel in her eyes, the way she stood like she'd been carved from the same stone as the mountains behind her. He'd spent weeks thinking she was the wrong woman. Too different, too strong, too much. Now he realized she was exactly right. Not for the dream he'd imagined, for the reality he was living. "All right," he said. "We stay. But we need a plan." "Do you have one?" "Not yet." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "But I know someone who might." Jacob Pritchard arrived the next morning with 2 of his ranch hands and enough supplies to fortify a small fortress. Ethan had ridden over at dawn to explain the situation. Jacob had listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. When Ethan finished, Jacob had simply said, "Give me 2 hours." Now he stood in Ethan's yard, surveying the ranch with the practiced eye of someone who'd defended his own property more than once. "Windows first," he said. "You need shutters on all of them, heavy ones. If they come at night, you don't want to give them clear shots inside." "I don't have lumber for shutters." "I brought some. Tom and Billy will help you install them." He gestured to his ranch hands, both young men with solid builds and serious faces. You got ammunition? Some. Not enough, I'd wager. I brought extra. Rifle and pistol both. Jacob turned to Mei Lin, who was standing on the porch. Ma'am, can you shoot? No, she said. Then you're learning today. Sarah's coming by this afternoon. She's a better teacher than I am. Mei Lin blinked. Your wife is coming here. Of course she is. You think I'd leave her at home when there's trouble? Jacob's expression softened slightly. She wanted to come right away, but I made her wait until we got the basics sorted. She's bringing food and medical supplies. Says if there's going to be a fight, folks should at least eat well before it. Ethan felt something loosen in his chest. You don't have to do this. Yeah, I do. Jacob met his gaze steadily. Samuel Porter's a bully and a coward. Always has been. Time someone stood up to him properly. He paused. Besides, what they're doing isn't right. Doesn't matter how I feel about mail-order brides or Chinese folks or anything else. A man's home is his home. Nobody has the right to drive someone out through fear. Most people in town don't see it that way. Most people in town are sheep. Jacob spat on the ground. They'll follow whoever's loudest. Right now, that's Porter and his crew. But if enough of us stand against them, that'll change. Mei Lin descended from the porch. Why are you helping us? You barely know me. Jacob considered this. My grandfather came to this country from Ireland, fled the famine with nothing but the clothes on his back. When he got here, people treated him like garbage, called him names, wouldn't give him work, burned down the first house he tried to build. He looked at Mei Lin directly. He survived because a few people decided to be decent when they didn't have to be. I figure I owe it to his memory to do the same. Mei Lin's expression softened. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We've got a lot of work to do. They spent the day transforming the ranch into something defensible. Tom and Billy worked on the shutters while Ethan reinforced the doors with extra bracing. Jacob walked the property line, identifying sight lines and weak points. Mei Lin followed him, listening intently as he explained basic defensive strategy. You want to know where they'll come from, Jacob said, pointing to the ridge. Most likely approach is from the east. Gives them cover until they're close, so you set up watches there, make sure you've got clear fields of fire. Fields of fire, Mei Lin repeated. Places where you can shoot without obstacles blocking your view. He glanced at her. You really never handled a gun? Never needed to. Well, you need to now. Sarah arrived mid-afternoon with a wagon full of supplies and her daughter Jenny in tow. The girl immediately ran to the corral where Diablo stood watching the activity. Can I pet him? She called. If he lets you, Mei Lin called back. Jenny approached the fence slowly, holding out her hand the way she'd seen Mei Lin do weeks before. Diablo lowered his head and allowed her to touch his muzzle. Sarah watched with obvious nervousness. Is that safe? He is gentler than most people, Mei Lin said. Sarah unpacked her wagon, pulling out wrapped packages of food, rolls of bandages, bottles of medicine. I didn't know what you'd need, so I brought everything. This is too much. Nonsense. Sarah's hands moved efficiently, organizing supplies. If men are going to be stupid, women have to be practical. She paused, then added quietly, I'm sorry this is happening to you. You are not responsible for other people's hatred. No. But I could have spoken up sooner, could have made it clear that you were welcome. Sarah's voice tightened. Instead, I smiled and brought bread and pretended that was enough. Mei Lin studied her. You were kind when you did not have to be. That is not nothing. It's not enough either. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Sarah straightened her shoulders. Well, we can't change the past, but we can make sure the future's different. Now Jacob says you need to learn to shoot. Let's get started. They set up targets behind the barn, old bottles lined up on fence posts. Sarah handed Mei Lin a pistol, showing her how to hold it properly. You want a firm grip, but not tight. Let the weapon settle in your hand. Mei Lin adjusted her grip, her expression focused. 2 hands for stability. Line up the sight with your target. Sarah stepped back. When you're ready, squeeze the trigger. Don't pull, squeeze. Mei Lin fired. The shot went wide, missing the bottles entirely. Again, Sarah said. Mei Lin fired again, and again, and again. On the 6th shot, a bottle exploded. Sarah smiled. There you go. Now do it 4 more times. They practiced for an hour. By the end, Mei Lin could hit 3 out of 5 shots consistently. You're a natural, Sarah said. Most people take weeks to get that comfortable. I am motivated. Sarah reloaded the pistol, then handed it back. Keep this with you. Jacob brought enough ammunition that you can practice daily. The more familiar you are with it, the better. Mei Lin accepted the weapon, weighing it in her hand. I do not like the idea of shooting people. Neither do I. But I like the idea of being helpless even less. Sarah's voice hardened. My grandmother survived an attack on her homestead when she was 17. 3 men came looking to steal and worse. She killed 2 of them with her husband's rifle, saved her own life and her sister's. She met Mei Lin's gaze. Sometimes being willing to fight is the only thing that keeps you alive. Your grandmother sounds strong. She was terrified, but she did what needed doing. Sarah squeezed Mei Lin's shoulder. Same as you. That evening, the 2 families shared dinner together. It was cramped. The cabin wasn't built for 8 people. But nobody seemed to mind. Jacob and his men talked about the day's work, pointing out improvements still needed. Jenny entertained herself by drawing pictures with a piece of charcoal on spare paper. Sarah and Mei Lin worked together in the kitchen, preparing a stew from the supplies Sarah had brought. You're good at this, Sarah observed, watching Mei Lin chop vegetables with practiced efficiency. I have cooked for many people. The laundry house fed 30 women every night. That must have been exhausting. It was necessary. Mei Lin added the vegetables to the pot. Everyone worked. Everyone contributed. That is how we survived. Sarah stirred the stew thoughtfully. Do you miss it, San Francisco? No. The answer came without hesitation. It was not a good place for me. Too many people, too much noise, and the men trailed off. Were they cruel to you? Some were. Others were simply indifferent, which is sometimes worse. Mei Lin tasted the stew, added salt. Here, at least, the cruelty is honest. People do not pretend to be kind while treating you as less than human. Sarah absorbed that. That's a sad way to measure a place, but a realistic one. They served dinner, and the conversation flowed around the table. Stories about ranching, complaints about the weather, speculation about when the first snow would come. Jenny showed Mei Lin her drawings. This is you, she said, pointing to a stick figure with long dark hair. And this is the scary horse that's actually nice. Mei Lin smiled. You are a good artist. Mama says I should draw things I see, not things I imagine. So I drew what happened before, when the horse protected you. Ethan looked at the drawing. Jenny had captured the essential truth, a large black shape standing between a woman and a group of threatening figures. You saw that? He asked. Jenny nodded seriously. We were coming down the road. Papa made us stop and wait until the bad men left. Jacob cleared his throat. Didn't want to get involved until we knew how it would shake out. Sorry for that. You came when it mattered, Ethan said. That's what counts. After dinner, Jacob pulled Ethan aside while the women cleaned up. You need to understand something, he said quietly. What we did today, the shutters, the fortifications, the shooting lessons, that's all preparation. But it might not be enough. I know. If Porter comes back with enough men, there's only so much you can do. 2 of you against 10 or 15. Jacob shook his head. Those aren't good odds. So what are you saying? I'm saying you need to make a decision. You can stay and fight knowing you might lose everything. Or you can leave, start over somewhere else, live to see another day. He met Ethan's gaze. Both choices take courage. Neither one is wrong. Ethan looked through the window at Mei Lin, who was laughing at something Sarah had said, her face open in a way he'd never seen before. She doesn't want to run, he said. What do you want? Ethan thought about that. About the years he'd spent on this ranch, alone and bitter, convincing himself that isolation was strength. About the moment Mei Lin had stepped off that stagecoach and shattered every assumption he'd held about what his life could be. I want to stay, he said. I want to fight for this. For her. For the idea that people should be able to live their lives without fear. Jacob nodded slowly. Then that's what we'll do. But you need to be smart about it. Porter's not going to come alone next time. He'll bring enough men to make sure he wins. So we need more people on our side. Exactly. And that means going into town, talking to folks, making them understand what's at stake. Jacob's expression was grim. Some won't listen, but some will. Enough maybe to make Porter think twice. When? Tomorrow. I'll go with you. We'll talk to everyone who might be sympathetic. Build support before Porter builds his army. That night, after Jacob's family left, Ethan and Mei Lin sat by the fire. The pistol Sarah had given her lay on the table between them. Are you all right? Ethan asked. I am thinking. About what? Mei Lin was quiet for a moment. About how strange it is that violence brings people together. We were alone before. Now, because someone threatened us, we have friends. I don't think it's the violence, it's the standing up to it. Perhaps. She picked up the pistol, turned it over in her hands. I have never killed anything, not even animals for food. The idea of pointing this at a person and pulling the trigger, she trailed off. You don't have to, Ethan said. I can... No. Her voice was firm. I cannot hide behind you. If I am to stay here, I must be able to defend myself. To defend this place. She set the pistol down. But I do not have to like it. I don't like it either. Then we are both doing something we hate in order to protect something we care about. She looked at him. Is that what courage is? Doing terrible things for good reasons? Ethan considered that. I think courage is being afraid and doing it anyway. The reasons matter, but so does the fear. Mei Lin nodded slowly. Then I am very courageous, because I am very afraid. The admission hung between them. Ethan reached across the table and took her hand. Her skin was rough from work, her grip strong. We'll get through this, he said. How can you be certain? I can't, but I know we have a better chance together than apart. Mei Lin's fingers tightened around his. Together, she repeated softly. I like the sound of that. They sat in silence, hands clasped, the fire burning low, both of them afraid but refusing to let fear win. Outside, Diablo stood watch in the darkness, his ears alert for any sound of danger. The next morning, Ethan and Jacob rode into Ridgeway. The town looked the same as always, quiet main street, people going about their business, children playing near the general store. But there was tension underneath. Ethan could feel it in the way people's eyes followed them, in the whispered conversations that stopped when they passed. Word had spread fast. They tied their horses outside the church and found Reverend Matthews inside, preparing for Sunday's service. The Reverend was an older man, weathered and practical, who'd been serving this community for 20 years. He looked up when they entered, his expression guarded. Brooks, Pritchard, what brings you here on a Thursday? We need to talk, Jacob said, about what's happening with Samuel Porter and his men. Matthews set down the hymnal he'd been holding. I heard about the incident at your ranch. Unfortunate business. It's more than unfortunate, Ethan said. It's illegal. They came onto my property and threatened my wife. Your mail-order bride, you mean? The correction stung, but Ethan kept his voice level. My wife. Legally married, which means they had no right to demand she leave. Matthews sighed. I understand your position, Brooks, but you have to see how this looks to folks. A Chinese woman in a town that's never had Chinese residents, it makes people nervous. People's nervousness doesn't give them the right to violence. No one's been violent yet. They would have been if my horse hadn't intervened. Matthews raised an eyebrow. Your horse? The stallion I've been training, Mei Lin's voice came from the doorway. All three men turned. She stood in the entrance wearing her plainest dress, her hair pulled back severely. She looked smaller than usual, quieter, but her eyes were sharp. Mrs. Brooks, Matthews said, I didn't realize you'd come to town. I go where my husband goes. She stepped inside. I wanted to meet the man who leads this community, to understand what kind of place I have chosen to call home. Matthews studied her. And what do you think so far? I think it is a place of frightened people, and fear makes them cruel. She moved closer. But I also think there are good people here, people who believe in fairness. I'm hoping you are one of them. I try to be. Then will you speak against what Samuel Porter is doing? Will you tell your congregation that threatening people in their own homes is wrong, regardless of who those people are? Matthews was silent for a long moment. It's not that simple, he said finally. It is exactly that simple, Mei Lin countered. Either you believe people have the right to live without fear, or you do not. There is no middle ground. There are practical considerations. There is right and wrong. Her voice hardened. I have lived in places where people chose practicality over morality, where they looked away from injustice because it was easier. Those places rot from the inside. Is that what you want for this town? Matthews's jaw tightened. You're asking me to take a stand that will divide my congregation. I'm asking you to do what is right. The rest will follow. They stared at each other. Finally, Matthews exhaled. I'll think about it. Think quickly, Jacob said, because Porter's not going to wait for everyone to make up their minds. He's building momentum. If we don't counter it soon, it'll be too late. They left the church and walked down the main street, stopping at every business, every home where they thought they might find support. Some people slammed doors in their faces. Others listened politely but refused to commit. A few, a very few, promised to help. Thomas McAllister was one of them. He found them outside the general store, his expression troubled. Brooks, I owe you an apology. For what? For suggesting you send her back. That was wrong of me. He glanced at Mei Lin. I let other people's opinions cloud my judgment. Should have known better. What changed your mind? Ethan asked. My daughter. She asked me what I'd do if someone tried to force her out of her home just for being different. Thomas's voice was rough. Made me realize I was being a hypocrite, supporting the same kind of hatred I'd fight against if it targeted my own family. So you'll stand with us? I will, and I'll talk to others, see if I can bring more people around. He hesitated. Can't promise it'll be enough. Porter's got a lot of support. Anything helps, Jacob said. They spent the rest of the day building what fragile alliances they could. By evening, they'd secured promises from 8 families. Not enough to outnumber Porter's faction, but enough to make him think twice. Maybe. As they rode back to the ranch, Ethan felt exhausted, not from the physical work, but from the emotional weight of convincing people that basic decency was worth defending. Do you think it will be enough? Mei Lin asked quietly. I don't know. We should prepare for the worst. Already doing that. She was silent for a moment. Then, if it comes to fighting, if people die because of me, I do not know if I can live with that. Ethan pulled his horse to a stop. Mei Lin did the same. This isn't because of you, he said. This is because of them. Because they're choosing hatred over humanity. You didn't start this. But I am the reason it is happening. No, they're the reason. Their fear, their prejudice, their refusal to see you as a person. He moved his horse closer to hers. You have done nothing wrong. Remember that. Mei Lin's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I am so tired of fighting just to exist. I know. Ethan reached out and took her hand. But you're not fighting alone anymore. She squeezed his fingers, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a shifting world. They rode the rest of the way home in silence, both of them knowing that peace was temporary, that violence was coming, that everything they'd built together might soon be tested beyond breaking. But for now, in the fading light, they had each other. And somehow, that felt like enough. They came 3 days later, just before dawn. Ethan woke to the sound of horses, many of them, moving slowly up the road toward the ranch. He was out of bed instantly, pulling on his pants, grabbing his rifle. Mei Lin was already awake, standing by the window with the pistol Sarah had given her. How many? He asked quietly. I count at least 12, maybe more. Ethan's stomach dropped. Even with Jacob's help, they'd only secured promises from 8 families, and not all of them had been willing to actually fight. Wake Jacob and his men in the barn, he said. They are already awake. I saw a lantern light 5 minutes ago. Of course she had. Mei Lin never missed anything. The horses stopped at the edge of the property, just beyond rifle range. In the gray pre-dawn light, Ethan could make out Samuel Porter at the front, flanked by men he recognized from town. Behind them, more shapes. Too many. Jacob emerged from the barn with Tom and Billy, all 3 carrying rifles. They positioned themselves strategically around the yard, using the corral fence and water trough for cover. Ethan stepped onto the porch, rifle across his chest. That's close enough, Porter. Samuel urged his horse forward a few steps. We're here to settle this peacefully, Brooks. No need for weapons. Then why'd you bring 15 men? Insurance, in case you got stubborn. Samuel's voice carried across the yard. We're giving you one last chance. Send the Chinese woman away and this all ends. Nobody gets hurt. She's my wife. She stays. Then you're choosing her over your neighbors, over your community. I'm choosing what's right over what's easy. Samuel shook his head slowly. You always were a stubborn fool. But I thought you had more sense than to die for a woman who doesn't even belong here. She belongs here more than you do. Ethan's voice hardened. This is private property. You're trespassing. Turn around and leave before someone does something stupid. We're not leaving without her. Then you're not leaving. The standoff stretched thin. Men on both sides gripped their weapons tighter. Then a voice cut through the tension. Samuel Porter, you should be ashamed of yourself. Everyone turned. Sarah Pritchard stood at the edge of the property holding a shotgun. Behind her, 3 other women from town. Martha Williams, Elizabeth Crane, and old Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house, all armed. Samuel's face darkened. Sarah, get out of here. This is men's business. Men's business. Sarah's voice dripped contempt. Is that what you call threatening a woman in her own home? Terrorizing your neighbors? We're protecting the town. You're protecting your own egos. Martha Williams stepped forward, her rifle steady. My husband might be too scared to stand up to you, Samuel, but I'm not. What you're doing is wrong, and I won't stand by while you pretend it's righteous. More movement from the road. Thomas McAllister appeared with his 2 sons, all carrying rifles. Behind them, 3 more ranchers Ethan recognized from his canvassing. Then Reverend Matthews, unarmed but wearing his clerical collar, his face grave. Samuel's confidence wavered. What is this? This is your community telling you no, Matthews said quietly. What you're attempting here is not justice. It's mob violence, and I cannot, in good conscience, allow it to happen without speaking against it. You're a reverend. I'm supposed to stand for what's right, to protect the weak, to oppose persecution. Matthews's voice strengthened, and that's exactly what I'm doing. More people emerged from the morning shadows, not all of them armed, but all of them present. A silent wall of bodies between Porter's men and the ranch. The 8 families who'd promised support had brought others. Friends, relatives, people who'd been on the fence but had finally chosen a side. Samuel looked around, his expression shifting from confidence to uncertainty to barely controlled rage. You're all making a mistake, he said. This sets a precedent we can't come back from. Good, Sarah said flatly, because the precedent we had before was that bullies got to decide who belonged and who didn't. Time for a new one. Samuel's hand drifted toward his pistol. Instantly, a dozen rifles raised. Don't, Jacob called. You're outnumbered now, Porter, and outgunned. You wanted to settle this peacefully? Then settle it peacefully and leave. The tension was a physical thing, pressing down on everyone. For a long moment, Samuel sat frozen, his hand hovering near his weapon, his face twisted with fury and humiliation. Then Mei Lin stepped onto the porch beside Ethan. She wasn't holding the pistol. Her hands were empty, visible. She stood straight and calm, meeting Samuel's gaze across the yard. You came here because you are afraid, she said, her voice carrying clearly in the still air. Afraid that if people like me are allowed to stay, the world you know will change. And you are right. It will change. Samuel's jaw clenched. But change is not the same as destruction, Mei Lin continued. I am not here to take anything from you. I am here to build a life with my husband, to work this land, to be part of this community, if it will have me. She paused. But I will not beg for acceptance, and I will not leave because you are afraid. You don't belong. I belong where I choose to belong, same as you, same as everyone. Her voice softened slightly. You can hate me for that. You can spend the rest of your life bitter that the world did not stay the same. But you cannot make me leave, not without violence. And if you choose violence, these people will stand against you. She gestured to the crowd that had gathered in the gray dawn light. Samuel looked around again, at the rifles pointed in his direction, at the faces of people who'd been his neighbors, his friends, now standing against him. His hand moved away from his pistol. This isn't over, he said, but the words had no weight behind them. Yes, it is, Matthews said. You've lost, Samuel. Accept it with whatever dignity you have left. Samuel's face went red, then white. He wheeled his horse around violently, nearly colliding with one of his own men. "Anyone who stays is a traitor to this town," he shouted. Nobody moved. He spurred his horse hard and rode off. A few of his men followed immediately. Others hesitated, looking at each other, at the crowd, at the ranch where Ethan and Mei Lin stood together. One by one, they turned and left. Within 5 minutes, they were gone. The silence that followed felt strange, heavy with adrenaline and relief and exhaustion all mixed together. Then Martha Williams lowered her rifle and said, "Well, that was dramatic." Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. People began moving again, voices rising as the tension broke. Some approached the porch to speak with Ethan and Mei Lin. Others gathered in small groups, processing what had just happened. Sarah climbed the porch steps and pulled Mei Lin into a fierce hug. "You were magnificent," she said. Mei Lin stood stiffly for a moment, then slowly returned the embrace. "Thank you. For coming. For standing with us." "Of course." Sarah pulled back, her eyes bright. "That's what neighbors do." Reverend Matthews approached next, his expression weary but sincere. "I apologize for my hesitation earlier. I should have spoken up immediately." "You spoke up when it mattered," Ethan said. "That's what counts." "Still, I allowed fear to silence me. That won't happen again." He looked at Mei Lin. "You're welcome at services, Mrs. Brooks, if you choose to attend." Mei Lin inclined her head. "Thank you." Thomas McAllister shook Ethan's hand firmly. "You've got guts, Brooks, both of you." "We just didn't want to run," Ethan said. "Most people would have. Hell, most people do." Thomas glanced at his sons, both young men who'd stood with rifles despite their obvious fear. "Taught my boys something important today. Sometimes the right thing is the hard thing." The crowd lingered for another hour, people introducing themselves to Mei Lin properly, offering help with repairs or supplies, or just their presence if trouble came again. It felt like something shifting, not acceptance exactly, but acknowledgement, a willingness to try. Finally, as the sun climbed higher and people began drifting back to their own ranches and homes, Jacob approached. "You did good," he said simply. "We all did," Ethan replied. True enough. Jacob looked out at the empty road where Porter had disappeared. "But this isn't completely finished. Porter's going to be angry, humiliated. Men like that don't forget." "I know. So watch yourself, both of you. And if anything happens, anything at all, send word immediately." "We will." Jacob clasped Ethan's shoulder briefly, nodded to Mei Lin, then gathered his men and left. Slowly the ranch emptied until only Ethan and Mei Lin remained. They stood on the porch in the morning sunlight, watching the dust settle on the road. "I did not think they would come," Mei Lin said quietly. "The people from town. I thought we would face this alone." "So did I. But they came anyway." "Yeah." Ethan turned to look at her. "Because of you. What you said. About belonging where you choose to belong." Mei Lin shook her head. "They came because you asked them to, because Jacob vouched for you, because people decided that principle mattered more than prejudice." She paused. "I was just the excuse, the test of whether they meant what they said about fairness." "You're more than an excuse." She looked at him, something vulnerable in her expression. "Am I?" Ethan stepped closer. "You're my wife, not on paper, not just legally, actually." The words felt clumsy, but he forced them out. "I know we didn't start this the right way. I know I disappointed you when you first arrived. But somewhere along the way, this became real for me. You became real, and I don't want to lose that." Mei Lin's eyes searched his face. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't want separate sides of the bedroom anymore. I don't want to keep pretending this is temporary or convenient or anything other than what it actually is." He took a breath. "I'm saying I want a real marriage, if you do." The silence stretched between them. Then Mei Lin smiled. A real smile, soft and genuine and completely unguarded. "I want that too," she said quietly. Ethan felt something unlock in his chest. He reached for her hand and she took it, her rough fingers intertwining with his. They stood there for a long moment, neither speaking, just holding on. Finally, Mei Lin squeezed his hand. "We should check the cattle. Make sure none scattered during the commotion. Practical as always. Someone has to be. They walked together toward the pasture, shoulders almost touching, and for the first time since she'd arrived, the space between them felt right. The weeks that followed were different, not easier. Samuel Porter remained bitter and hostile, and there were still people in town who made their disapproval clear through cold shoulders and sharp comments. But the ranch felt less isolated. People stopped by regularly. Sarah with food or fabric scraps for sewing, Jacob to help with heavy repairs, Thomas to discuss cattle prices and market conditions. Mei Lin started attending the Sunday services, sitting beside Ethan in the back row. Some people welcomed her. Others pointedly ignored her. She handled both with the same calm dignity. She also continued working with Diablo, and word spread about the Chinese woman who could tame wild horses. The ranchers began bringing their problem animals to her, offering to pay for her time. Ethan watched with quiet pride as she built a reputation separate from his. As people started seeing her not as Brooke's mail-order bride, but as Mei Lin, someone skilled, strong, worth knowing. One evening, about 6 weeks after the standoff, they sat together after dinner. Mei Lin had been sewing, working on a piece of fabric she'd been secretive about for days. Now she held it up. It was a pillowcase, decorated with delicate embroidery, flowers and vines in colored thread, intricate and beautiful. "My mother taught me to make beautiful things," she said softly. "I had forgotten, but I am remembering now." Ethan stared at the craftsmanship. "That's incredible." "It is not perfect. I am out of practice." "It's perfect enough." She set it aside carefully. "I am making a set for our bed." "Our bed, not the bed. Ours." Ethan felt warmth spread through his chest. "I'd like that." Mei Lin looked at him, her expression open. "I am happy here, with you. I did not expect to be, but I am. I'm happy too. Even though I am not what you ordered?" Ethan considered that. "You're better than what I ordered. What I ordered was a fantasy, someone to fill a hole without requiring anything from me. You're real. You challenge me. Make me better." He paused. "Make me want to be better." "You were always better than you thought. You just needed someone to see it. And you needed someone to see you." "Yes." Her voice was soft. "I did." They sat in comfortable silence, the fire crackling, the world outside dark and quiet. Winter came early that year, bringing snow that turned the valley into something clean and white and new. Ethan and Mei Lin worked side by side through the cold months, caring for the cattle, maintaining the buildings, preparing for spring. They moved Ethan's crate to Mei Lin's side of the room, eliminating the invisible line that had divided their space. They shared the bed without awkwardness, finding comfort in proximity. One night, during a particularly fierce blizzard, Mei Lin woke from a nightmare. Something about the laundry house, men's hands, violence. Ethan held her while she shook, not speaking, just present. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For what?" "For being weak." "You're not weak. You're human." He pulled her closer. "And you're safe. Nobody's going to hurt you here." She pressed her face against his shoulder. "Promise?" "I promise." She fell back asleep in his arms, and Ethan lay awake, listening to her breathing, feeling the weight of her trust settle over him like a blanket. He'd protect this. Protect her. Whatever it took. By spring, the ranch was thriving in ways it never had before. The cattle had survived the winter in good condition. Mei Lin's horse training had brought in additional income. The garden she'd planted the previous year had taught them what grew well in this soil, and they planned a larger one for the coming season. More importantly, they'd built something together. Not the marriage Ethan had imagined when he'd sent that first letter. Something better. Something real. One warm April morning, Mei Lin came in from the garden with dirt on her hands and a strange expression on her face. "What's wrong?" Ethan asked. "Nothing is wrong." She sat down at the table. "I am pregnant." Ethan's brain stopped working for a moment. "You're... what?" "Pregnant. I have suspected for a few weeks, but now I am certain." She watched him carefully. "Are you upset?" "Upset? No, He struggled for words. "I'm terrified. And happy. Mostly terrified." A small smile crossed her face. Me too. Ethan sat down across from her, reaching for her hands. They were still dirty from the garden, rough from work, strong. A baby, he said, testing the words. Yes. Our baby. Yes? Her voice softened. I did not plan this, did not expect it, but I find I am not sorry. Neither am I. Ethan squeezed her hands. Scared out of my mind, but not sorry. Mei Lin laughed, the sound bright and genuine. Then we will be scared together. The news spread through the community quickly. Sarah Pritchard immediately appointed herself as Mei Lin's advisor, arriving with books and advice and stories about her own pregnancies. You'll be fine, she assured Mei Lin. Your body knows what to do, and you're strong enough to handle anything. Other women started visiting more frequently, bringing gifts for the coming baby, offering their own experiences and wisdom. Even some of the women who'd been cool to Mei Lin before softened when they learned she was pregnant. Something about impending motherhood made her more human to them, more acceptable. Ethan wasn't sure how he felt about that. The idea that Mei Lin only became worthy of kindness once she was carrying a child. But he kept his thoughts to himself. If it meant she'd have more support, more community, he'd take it. Samuel Porter, predictably, made his opinion known through pointed comments at the general store and saloon. Breeding now, are they? That's all we need. More of them. But even his supporters seemed less enthusiastic about his hatred now. The standoff had cost him credibility. People still listened to him, but they didn't follow anymore. Summer arrived with heat and work and the steady expansion of Mei Lin's belly. She remained active longer than anyone expected, continuing to train horses and work in the garden until Sarah finally put her foot down. You'll hurt yourself, Sarah scolded. Or the baby. Sit down. Rest. I am not fragile. No, but you're carrying precious cargo. Let other people do the heavy work for a while. Reluctantly, Mei Lin agreed. She spent her final months sewing clothes for the baby, embroidering blankets, preparing the small room off the bedroom that would become a nursery. Ethan watched her work with something like awe. This woman who'd arrived with nothing, who'd been rejected and threatened and told she didn't belong, was now creating a whole new life, building a future despite everything. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset, Mei Lin rested her hand on her swollen belly. I am afraid, she admitted, of the birth, of being a mother, of not knowing how. She looked at him. My own mother died when I was young. I have no model for this. What if I do it wrong? Ethan moved closer, placing his hand over hers on her belly. You'll figure it out, same way you figured out everything else, by being strong and smart and refusing to give up. What if that is not enough? Then we'll figure it out together. I don't know how to be a father any more than you know how to be a mother. We're both learning, he paused, but I know one thing for certain. What? This kid's gonna be lucky, because they'll have you. Mei Lin's eyes filled with tears. And you, they will have you too. Yeah. Ethan smiled. They will. The baby came on a cool September evening 3 weeks earlier than expected. Sarah and Martha Williams served as midwives, while Ethan paced outside the bedroom, trying not to panic at every sound. The labor was long and difficult. Hours stretched into more hours, and Ethan's fear grew with each passing moment. Finally, just before midnight, a baby's cry split the air. Sarah emerged from the bedroom, her face exhausted but smiling. You have a daughter, she said, and she's perfect. Ethan's legs almost gave out. Mei Lin? Tired, but fine. Go see them. He entered the bedroom on shaking legs. Mei Lin lay propped against pillows, her hair damp with sweat, her face pale. But she was smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she'd embroidered. Come meet your daughter, she said softly. Ethan approached slowly, hardly breathing. The baby was impossibly small, with a shock of dark hair and Mei Lin's eyes. She'd stopped crying and was looking around with the unfocused gaze of the newly born. She's beautiful, Ethan whispered. She is ours. Mei Lin's voice was thick with emotion. Our daughter. Ethan sat carefully on the edge of the bed, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny hand. Her fingers immediately curled around his. What should we name her? He asked. Mei Lin considered this. My mother's name was Lily, And Sarah said your mother was called Grace. Lily Grace Brooks. Ethan tested the name. I like that. So do I. They sat together, the three of them, as the night deepened around them. Outside, Diablo whinnied softly, as if welcoming the new arrival. The months that followed were exhausting and beautiful in equal measure. Lily proved to be a healthy baby, strong-lunged and demanding. She had Ethan's stubborn streak and Mei Lin's intensity, and she ruled their household with the absolute authority only an infant can command. The community embraced her in ways they'd never fully embraced Mei Lin. People who'd been cold before now stopped to admire the baby, to offer gifts, to share advice. Jenny Pritchard was particularly smitten, begging to hold Lily every time she visited. "She's so pretty," Jenny said, carefully supporting the baby's head the way Sarah had taught her. "And she looks like both of you." It was true. Lily had inherited features from both parents, Mei Lin's dark eyes and hair, Ethan's nose and chin. She was a perfect blend, belonging equally to both. One afternoon in late autumn, nearly a year after the standoff, Ethan and Mei Lin sat on the porch while Lily slept in a cradle Ethan had built. The ranch had never looked better. The repairs were complete, the cattle were fat and healthy, the garden had yielded more than they could use. They'd even started planning an expansion, another room for when Lily got older, maybe a proper barn to replace the leaning structure. "I have been thinking," Mei Lin said. "About what?" "About how different my life is now compared to a year ago, compared to what I thought it would be." She looked at him. "I expected survival, work, loneliness dressed up as marriage. And instead I got a home, a partner, a daughter, a community that is learning to accept me, slowly, but learning." She paused. "I got more than I ever hoped for." Ethan took her hand. "So did I. I thought I was ordering someone to fill a gap, someone gentle and quiet who'd make my life easier. And instead you got me. Instead I got you, someone strong and fierce who challenged everything I thought I knew." He smiled. "Someone who made my life harder in the best possible way." Mei Lin laughed. "I am not sure that is a compliment." "It is, because easy isn't always good, and hard isn't always bad." He squeezed her hand. "You made me better, made this place better, made everything better." "We made each other better," Mei Lin corrected. "That is how partnership works." In the cradle, Lily stirred, making the small noises that meant she'd wake soon. Mei Lin stood to get her, lifting the baby with practiced ease. Lily's eyes opened, focusing on her mother's face, and she smiled, a real smile, full of recognition and trust. "Hello, little one," Mei Lin murmured. "Did you have a good sleep?" Lily cooed in response. Ethan watched them together, this woman and child who'd reshaped his entire world, and felt something he'd thought he'd lost years ago. Hope. Not the desperate, grasping hope of a lonely man ordering a fantasy through the mail. Real hope. Grounded hope. Hope built on actual people and actual love and the actual work of building a life together. "What are you thinking?" Mei Lin asked, settling back beside him with Lily in her arms. "That I'm grateful." "For what?" "For you, for her, for all of this." He gestured at the ranch, the valley, the mountains beyond. "For the fact that you stepped off that stagecoach and refused to be anything other than exactly who you are." Mei Lin's expression softened. "And I am grateful that you eventually saw me. Really saw me. Not as a mistake or a burden, but as a person worth knowing." "Worth loving," Ethan corrected. She looked at him, eyes bright. "Yes, worth loving." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun moved across the sky, Lily dozing between them, the ranch settling into the peaceful rhythm of late afternoon. In town, Samuel Porter still nursed his bitterness, still made his comments. But his power had broken. The community had chosen a different path. On the ranch, 3 people who'd started as strangers were now a family. Imperfect, unconventional, built from disappointment and determination and the slow, steady work of choosing each other every day. Ethan looked at Mei Lin, at the strength in her profile, the gentleness in how she held their daughter. She'd never been the gentle, soft-spoken bride he'd imagined. She was better, she was real, and she was his, just as he was hers. Together, they'd built something that couldn't be ordered through the mail or imagined in lonely nights. something that had to be earned through honesty and courage and the willingness to see each other clearly, flaws and all. A home, a family, a love that didn't fit the world's expectations but had reshaped their world around it. Maylin leaned her head against his shoulder, and Ethan wrapped his arm around her, holding his family close as the Wyoming sun painted the sky gold and red and the ranch settled into evening. Behind them, Diablo stood watch in the corral, guardian and friend, the wild stallion who'd been gentled by patience and trust, just like everything else in their lives, just like them.